My take on Sheikh or Imam Google or Rabbi Google is just look at what you know the best, like anything that you really studied in a classroom, read a lot on any topic, like how to make a lentil soup, and Google it to see in the areas that you know how much is how much information there is helpful and misleading, etc. It's so interesting. Like I know something about Islam and Muslims as an imam, as a professor of Islamic studies. And any topic that I Google on Islam, from food to end of life, it's incredibly, there's so much good information there. But if you don't have the basics, if you don't have the filters, if you don't have the teachers, mentors who can sort of sort this out for you, it's not the most healthiest and productive way of learning anything, really. I mean, it's a good start. The fact that you actually care and rely and search is a Dainu, as we Muslims say. But I hope you will go further. Okay, welcome everyone. We only have 20 minutes. So my name is Imam Abdullah Antepli. I am at Duke University as an imam, as a professor of Islamic studies and interfaith relations. I know David Esrin, the founder of this wonderful organization. When I knew him when he was a dreaming freshman. And this whole organization was born in one of my exciting breakfast conversations with him. So I have a very small, modest, but significantly central role in Together We Remember. Our topic, in the interest of time, I'm going to rush. I hope our contact information will be shared. I hope this is just the beginning of many conversations to come. I, in all honesty, as often publicly introduce myself as I am a recovering anti-Semite. I grew up in Turkey, in the southeastern part of Turkey, and a very secular, very not religious, chauvinistically nationalist home environment, and the education was embedded in a filthy, despicable, disgusting anti-Semitism. The first book I read about Jews, Judaism, and Zionism was the children's versions of the Protocols of Elders of Zion, children's version. And then I read Henry Ford's, at the age of 12, my father gave me. And the children's version of Henry Ford's International Jew, one of the worst anti-Semitic stuff. And before 15, I read Mein Kampf like 3-4 times. And as you can imagine, I was completely, that's why I consider myself a recovering anti-Semite, because I exposed the hate so early. It got into my system very, very early. It wasn't just a bias and negative views of Judaism and Jews. For a number of years, I was made to believe that Judaism as religion, Jews as people, Israel and Zionism is irredeemably evil. And me growing up, I'm not going to go in the detail. Thank God, Baruch Hashem, Alhamdulillah, God of love didn't let me live with that kind of poison. I was able to, mainly by becoming imam, becoming religious, I was able to get that poison out of my system as much as possible, and I'm driving the opposite direction. Understanding Israeli-Palestinian conflict played a very significant role in being exposed to anti-Semitism, being vulnerable to anti-Semitism. And what slowed me down in that highway of hate was studying religion, getting exposed to the mainstream Islamic theology. But ultimately, what got me out of my highway of hate, what got me out of the nearest exit and driving in the opposite direction is really engaging meaningful conversation with Jews, God-fearing, God-loving Jews and Israeli and American Jews. And it's so interesting. Here's a Turkish kid. I spent my teenage years burning Israeli flags in a pro-Palestinian protest in Istanbul. But here I am now teaching interfaith relations. I spent a month in Israel, in Jerusalem, at a Zionist Israeli organization called Shalom Hartman Institute. And I teach Islam and Jewish-Muslim relations to Israeli bureaucrats, IDF soldiers, and I take groups of American Muslim leaders with me to learn about Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. I want to share one aspect of this journey. When I was recovering from my own anti-Semitism, and in the United States, engaging with this cross-faith conversations with many of the interfaith settings, it was incredibly unhelpful that for these interfaith settings, civic engagement programs, they shied away from Israeli-Palestinian conflict for a reason. It's so painful. Often people don't know how to engage with it. And if you can avoid it as much as you can really build relationship among partisan groups between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli. I hate these labels, but for the lack of a better term. But whenever there's a cycle of violence in the Holy Land, these seemingly well-intentioned kumbaya singing interfaith circles, they fall apart over and over and over and over again. I understand how things can be incredibly complicated in the Middle East. And to a certain extent in Europe, especially in France and England, but especially in North America, where there's a large number of Jews, Muslims, and others who are deeply involved in trying to make sense of this conflict and making sure it's not spilling over to where we are, and bringing our relationship to a level of sophistication and health that we can actually talk about this. Our inability is regretfully is causing incredible amount of pain. Our inability to have this relationship with people who we vehemently disagree on Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At its best, if we only get along, if we don't talk about it. At its worst, we debate it with self-serving facts, throwing each other all the time. Everybody has their own set of United Nations resolutions about the conflict. So I would like to challenge this seemingly common practice that we can't talk about it. This is a landmine. We can't talk about it. And I understand, again, I'm not trivializing this. I paid a huge cost in my own community for saying we have to talk about this and doing something about it. If you Google my name or look at the program that I'm running at Shalom Hartman Institute, you will see from social media lynching campaigns to death threats to FBI safe houses to wherever. I paid a huge price, but I still want to claim or insist that any meaningful conversation on Middle East or Jewish-Muslim relations or interfaith conversations, especially among for those who deeply care in one way or another, should be really focusing on, you may not start it from there, but your end goal is to bring that conversation, dialogue, educational effort to a level of health again, that we can actually talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what in the remaining 2 minutes, I want to summarize this Muslim Leadership Initiative. Maybe I can quickly put the few links on the chat room that you can further read. And this is Chronicle of Higher Education article, magazine. They did a cover story about the program and the kind of scandal and controversy that it has caused, mainly in American Muslim communities, and the huge cost that participants paid for being part of this program. So the question is how to start and talk through this very painful political conflict. Is the proposal, the details are in here, is there a way in which people who deeply care in one way or another can develop educational programs, educationally, not politically, not socially, not community politics, but just in the primary stages. If you are a pro-Palestinian like myself, who deeply care, nothing that I have done, all this work, didn't make me less of a pro-Palestinian so far. I still stand in solidarity with that human suffering, which is real. It's not a fiction. But I came a long way in understanding the Jewish narrative, the Zionist narrative, the Israeli narratives. It is not one, it's a wide spectrum. I came to understand what Israel means to my Jewish brothers and sisters' Jewish identity, wherever they are, in South Africa, in New York, in North Carolina, where I live. I came to understand the creation of the states, existence of it, thriving of it, what kind of a collective religious fulfillment, a homecoming project, means for my Jewish brothers, I grew to understand and appreciate it. So without losing my solidarity and connection to my Palestinian brothers and sisters, my one way of learning, trying to see the world through the eyes of Jews who consider themselves as Zionists, trying to see the world through the eyes of Jewish brothers and sisters who, for them, Zionism and Israel means a whole variety of large spectrum of realities. Seeing there's nuances, it didn't sort of necessarily reduce my disagreements towards human rights violations that Palestinians are going through, but it opened up a huge space in my heart and mind, not only mine, but also the 150 alumni of this program. And it forced my Jewish brothers and sisters to do the reciprocal journey to try to understand Palestinian narratives or understanding of Palestinian suffering through the eyes of many of their Muslim brothers and sisters. What did this state's creation in 1948 meant? How did it lend to the Muslim mirrors in a wide spectrum of way? And when we look, what kind of a reality we see in that part of the world? Again, without losing their pride to Zionism, without losing their pride and connection and loyalty to Israel. Educationally, this is possible. I think a lot of people, they shy away from this topic because it's not a very easy solution, quick solution. It's much easier and fun to talk about kosher chicken, halal chicken, hummus. But we must really, at least some of us, should invest in these educational programs to be the bridge builder between incredibly divisive, polarizing, and controversial topic of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So my challenge to all of you is, not only I claim, I spent the last 10 years really running program after program, educationally inviting Muslims who are more or less pro-Palestinian to learn one way, with no obligation to agree. Can you try to see the world through the eyes of people whom Israel means something? It educationally works in wonders. And when this is done, the goodwill that it creates always is reciprocated by a lot of the Jews who know them. And when they try to see the world through the eyes of, which requires really a decent level of education. Can this work? Because enough number of bodies are flown through this Israeli-Palestinian river that we really need to reorganize what we think. In the wisdom of Rabbi Einstein, if you keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, that means you are basically insane. If we keep putting Israeli-Palestinian conflict as an 800-pound gorilla and 8,000-pound, so we will be in the same unimpressive place where we are. It's time to change the discourse. It's time for those who just check, I'm a pro-Israeli Jew. I understand and learn Jewish narrative, Zionist narrative from the Jews and Zionists. I spend the time. It is time for me to do the same educational journey on the Palestinian side and vice versa. This is what I'm proposing, and see if there is an interest, if there is any question that we can struggle with. I was hoping to speak only for 10 minutes, but forgive me, I'm a clergy. Clergy in no religion cannot speak briefly.
Yes, thank you, Imam Antepli. Very, very helpful. Why don't I ask folks, if you have a question, to just either raise your hand or drop a question in the chat, and I will kick it off with one.
Yeah.
Imam Antepli, you know, most of the people in this room are involved in public programming with museums and so forth. And I can imagine that there would be a lot of people who are open to the conversation. Those who are in this room are obviously open to the conversation, except I think there's probably some fear that there will be people who attend that event who are more assertive or aggressive or disruptive voices. And so it's a question of structurally, how do we make these conversations or curate these conversations so that they can be done in trust and understanding?
Thank you. Excellent question. Let me start with how not to. First of all, that fear is real, and one has to be very, very careful. You can do a lot of harm in this incredibly sensitive topic. How not to create this conversation is Israel, Zionism has, thankfully, so many defenders, so many partisan foot soldiers in many different ways. But Israel and Zionism doesn't have enough teachers, explainers. People who organize these programs, they come from often, and same thing for the pro-Palestinian communities and organizations like myself, my community as well. So the departure point is, do you know the word hasbara? Like a hasbara is like propaganda, PR. If you organize in a Holocaust museum a program that you are hoping you will only show the best of Israel, or in a pro-Palestinian organization, you only want to show the suffering caused by Israel. Palestinian suffering is real, and it's partially or mainly caused by Israeli occupation or involvement in that region, but it's not the only one. I mean, Palestinians suffer in their own leadership, in their own community, by their own people. Like, if you are not willing to just go a few miles and bring up an integrity, doing an organizing program, not as a partisan where you want to gain more members or show only the good side of your story. If you are not willing to show the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you are not going to proudly show the good, but also put ugly and bad and ethically, and show people how you are ethically, morally struggling with this, that means it's only going to backfire. Don't do anything better. So I'm inviting people to do programs, knowing that fear, but creating a space where there is a little bit of, at least a mile, between criticizing the state of Israel and anti-Semitism, where people can actually talk, learn how can I legitimately criticize the policies of the state without crossing the line into anti-Semitism and hate. For many Muslims, they don't even know how. They need some education. They need some gracious teachers who can teach what is criticizing of the state, what is trading in the anti-Semitic throes. Similarly, if you are a pro-Palestinian and want to do pro-Palestinian activism, but you are not willing to acknowledge the failures of the Palestinian leadership and the Arab leadership and the Muslim leadership, that means you are not honest. You are there to just basically debate or propagate. That's not what I'm advocating. I'm advocating for an honest space where people can actually really bring down these, this is a fight between good and evil, and my side is all good, your side is all evil. That's exactly what we need to avoid from.
Thank you. And noting that we only have a couple of minutes left, unfortunately, I'm hoping, Imam Antepli, that you'll stick around into the next session and maybe answer some questions in the chat bar. But I want to give Roby Damelin from the Parents Circle a chance to ask you a question. So Roby, please.
Sure. And I want to answer James' question too. That's a profound one.
Yes, let's go to Roby, and then we'll work our way down.
So thank you very much. I am part of the Parents Circle.
I know you, Roby. I'm a big fan. I listened to your many lectures in the United States with Ali Abu Awad. Much love to you.
Oh, this is a long time ago.
Yes.
So what I really would ask you is not to be pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, because actually what you do with that is you're importing our conflict into your country and creating hatred between Jews and Muslims. And I would like to offer you a program, if you're interested. It's a parallel narrative program. It's called like History Through the Human Eye. We have more than several thousand alumni who have done this program. I'm not going to go into it now because it's taking up everybody's time, but I would be very happy to talk to you about this program, which I think would be an ideal program for you to do in an interfaith when you have to deal with the elephant in the room. And right. It's the creating trust enough to listen to the other side and have empathy, even if you don't agree with them. So yes, I'm gone.
Lovely, lovely. Good to see you. Seeing you brought me all these wonderful memories. I absolutely agree with you. Rumi, the famous Sufi and mystic, says, you can only start a journey with people from where they are. I'm sorry if it comes across as pragmatic to bottom line. I agree with you. Those terms are problematic. It only inherits the complicated history. I feel still on the ground, the realities are people in their own unique ways, in a wide spectrum of diversity, they fall into these camps. And I want to meet them where they are. And I want to take them into a whole different place. And if I can quickly mention James, I think the question should be asked differently. Is anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism? The answer is it can be, but categorically not. It can be. It can be, if your anti-Zionism is putting all forms of Zionism into one basket and define it as evil, as colonial establishment, that is anti-Semitism. But if your anti-Zionism is making a difference, breaking it down to some of the European secular Zionist policies impact on Palestinian or indigenous people of the land before Israel was created, why? No, absolutely not. It can be anti-Semitism if your anti-Zionism is obsessed with Israel. You don't do the same level of criticism to other countries. Look at United Nations. In the United Nations Human Rights Commission, Israel is condemned more than the rest of the world combined. I mean, even if everything you say about Zionism and Israel is true, is it really the case? Like, is it worse than Saudi Arabia? Is it worse than China, where 3 million people are? Palestinian suffering is a real one, but neither it's the only Muslim suffering nor the worst one. It's neither the only one nor the worst one. And if you are singling out an inconsistent ethics and morality, you are only putting entire blame into one country, and none of your activities or intellectual thinking or moral imagination doesn't include similar or much more worse Muslim sufferings in other parts of the world, that is anti-Semitism. So anti-Zionism categorically is not an anti-Semitism. No. That's why I lose a lot of my Jewish friends. I will say something explosive. Like, I really don't understand this anti-BDS obsession. There are so many anti-Semitic elements or people within the BDS movement, but is BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction, which is to me ineffective, wrong? I am not a sweetheart to them because of their attacks to me. I got so many multiple death threats. But I wouldn't categorically say BDS is categorically, with no qualification, an anti-Semitic movement. It isn't. To say this and try to criminalize something like that is a violation of free speech. Then you are becoming the monsters that you are running away from. So let me offer some criticism there. Then go case by case, issue by issue, point out when it becomes anti-Semitism, and even if it angers you and disappoints you, when it isn't, when it's a qualified, legitimate policy disagreement, political disagreement, don't equate any criticism of the state into anti-Semitism, then you lose your own credibility.